it's Marianne from Thrive Admin Services. In this video, I'm going to be showing you how you can get to know the parts of a page in your Word document. This is important because when you understand what the different parts that make up the page around your content do and how they can help you really level up your documents, you can make the most of that really valuable real estate. So we're going to be looking at margins and size, orientation, and headers and footers in this video. All sections that on their own you can spend a little bit of time playing with and get used to and figure out how you can make the most of that those elements in your own documents and take yourself to the next level. So let's get started.
Alrighty, so we are working in Microsoft Word. I am using Microsoft 365, the business subscription, and I am working on the desktop version of Word. I'm also working on my Mac today for this video. So if you are on a Windows PC or a tablet or your phone, then the layout will look different. Likewise, if you are working on the web version, this will also look different for you. So with all of that out of the way, what I've got for you here is a very basic Word document so you can see how when we're playing with the parts of the page, how it changes my content. We've got text, we've got an image, and so what I wanted to show you is what the sections of the page are, how you can use them, and why they're important. So the first thing we're going to talk about is the fact that the main body of your text sits here in the center, and it's framed by 4 sections of white space. Now those 4 sections have individual names. We've got our header and our footer, top and bottom, and we've got our margins, which are top, bottom, left and right. So the header and footer are actually overlaid on your margins. The margins are the absolute white space. It's where it won't allow the text to move between or outside of. And the header and footer are those extra spaces where we put some of our automations or some of our key document information, things like file names, things like page numbering, version control, report or the document title, the file path. You might have a client name or a logo in there, but it's that valuable real estate for the header and footer at the top and bottom where you can put information in that needs to be on every page, but that you don't necessarily want to have take up some of this window where your actual content will sit. So we're going to have a look at how these all work. So we're actually accessing them all from our layout tab on the ribbon, and we're going to be looking at margins, our orientation and size today, just to get those 3 areas so we understand how the page works and what we're dealing with. So the first one we're going to have a look at will be margins. So as I've explained in your introduction there, the margins are the white space around each border or each edge of the page in your document. And Microsoft Word offers some defaults, but then you can create some custom ones that will change the layout as well. So let's work through those. So from our ribbon, we're heading to the layout tab, and then we've got margins here, and we've got a drop down. Now, we're going to work through some of these so that you understand what they all do. The default is normal, and it's 2.54 centimeters or 1 inch, top, bottom, left, and right. And that's from the edge of the page down. So that means that there will always be a 1 inch band of white space around the edge of your document content. Your text will run from 1 inch in on the left to 1 inch in on the right, and it will never sit higher than 1 inch from the top or 1 inch from the bottom of the edge of the page. And this is chosen as the default. It's the one that means that if you are printing and you're going to bind or staple or spiral bind or put into a workbook or a binder or a plastic sleeve or whatever, it's not going to cut into any of your text. It means that most printers will recognize this and you won't have your text run off the page. And it gives a really nice visual look. The page looks centered and balanced, and your text will align nicely. But then you may decide that for whatever reason, whether it's the amount of text or a limit to the number of pages you're working with or the type of content that you have might have graphics or columns or text boxes and flowcharts and things, so you need a bit more space to work with. And in that instance, you may look at some of these other options. So the first one is narrow, and a narrow is, and you can see from this here, the top, bottom, left and right are exactly half. So it does exactly what it says on the tin. It narrows that white space around our page. So if I switch this document to narrow, you can see that suddenly we're using a lot more of the page for our text. It's stretched out, it's sitting higher and lower. I can revert back to this at any time. Now, by doing this, I am applying the margin changes to the entire document. So be aware of that. This is not a section of text. This is purely for the whole document. The next one down is moderate, and you can see that what we've got here then is that our top and bottom remain at that inch, but the left and right are slightly smaller than normal. So what we end up with is wider, but the same width, same height. So if I do this, you can see we get more text in the page because we've got longer or more space left to right, but we have the same amount of space top and bottom. I'll go back to the normal one. Then what we have is a wide one, and what this is going to do is condense the window that we can put our text in. So top and bottom are the same, but our left and right are now 5.08, which is double. So we're actually going to have twice as much white space on the left and right hand side, which looks like this. So it's more like a flyer layout. If you're doing a print version where you were going to cut these out or have them laminated, things like lanyards or flyers, menus, those sorts of things, this would be a size that might be more appropriate for when you're doing cutting and guillotining of the pages and then laminating and that sort of thing. We'll go back to normal, and then we've got mirrored. Now mirrored is designed to give us the top and bottom are, just check the top and bottom are still our 1 inch. The left is 3.18 and the right is 2.54, and I'll show you, this is a 2-page one. So I'm just going to change the view to multiple pages. We'll go back to our layout tab and I'm going to switch that to mirrored. You see what it's done is it's pulled this across. So if I was to take all of this again, I'm just going to copy it into here so we go across a couple of pages. So you can see now we've got a much thicker left-hand side to our right-hand side. This is perfect if you're going to bind, if you're doing something that's got a larger section, so whether it's staple binding or heat seal binding or rip spiral binding, which means you would need a little bit more space here that would allow you to do that without it impacting your text. Okay, so that's what that one is. That one has our right margin is the same as our top and bottom, but that left margin is a little bit deeper. Now the other option that we have is to create custom margins, and this is where you can play around with things and really change up the way these work for you. So here we've got our top, bottom, left, right and a gutter, and what you can do here is you can then play around with how they sit. You can type it in or you can play around with it here. You can put the gutter position, you can set some, so for multiple pages, is it a normal? Is it to mirror the margins? So then you'll be able to play with it. 2 pages per sheet, which is where we're splitting it in 2, or a book fold option. And all of these will determine and how many sheets you have. So if we go to 2 pages per sheet and how many sheets you have in your booklet. The mirror margins. So mirror margins means that what I can do, I've got it, instead of left and right, I've got an inside and outside. So that means that if I was to make my inside 3.5 and I was to make, I'm not worried about that one so much, but to make my outside 2, and we look at that, yep, that's fine. We'll just ignore that in this instance. You see what it's done is that when my first page and then the big margin here and the big margin here, so that in this, that would be my title page, and page 2 and 3, this is where the binding would be. This is where it would open as a single book at the bound section where you would turn the page. And so this is wider to allow for that binding to not impact my text. So that is your margins. The next one that I want to talk to you about is the orientation of your document. So an orientation is whether it is portrait, so the way we see it as a typical, what would be considered a standard page, and then landscape, which is our long form. So you can choose that for the entire document. And in this example, we are talking about the entire document, again from our layout tab, and we've got orientation. The default is portrait. It is the most used or the most common choice for a document, and is the one that you would use for letters and correspondence and reports and general content that you would produce typically. However, a landscape document is really useful for things like workbooks and large tables and things that have a lot of graphic content or flowcharts. So if your document is primarily those elements, a landscape choice may work better for you. So by simply selecting this here, it's going to hold all of my margin rules. It's going to hold all of my formatting. Nothing else is going to change. It's just that we turn the page around. And so you can see here, I've gone from when it was portrait, it is 3 pages. And when I switch it to landscape, it moves to 4. So that is how you would change the orientation. And you can choose one way or another, but this button is designed to work for the entire document. Now, I want to talk a little bit about the size of your document. This may not necessarily figure into the parts of your page, but it's something to consider, particularly when you're playing with things like margins, orientation, and when we look at our headers and footers. So the size of your document relates to the paper size, and it's really important because if you're in Australia like I am, then we typically work with an A4 page as the standard default. If you're in the US, there's something called US letter, and it's a slightly different size. So if I look at my size options here in my menu, as we scroll down, you'll see we've got A4, which is 21 centimeters by 29.7. So it's obviously a rectangle, but that is important to know. But then when we look at, if I scroll all the way down here, we've got US legal, which is 21.59 by 35.56. And then we've also got US letter, which is 21.59 by 27.94. Now, it may not seem like a big deal, but if you're working with images and tables and large volumes of text, when you print it or design it in one particular format and you send it to somebody who uses a different standard, then it will look out of whack for them. Or if they go to print it, if you've created it on, say, A4 paper with the size as A4, and then when they go to print it, they print it on US letter, it's not going to work right. So some of the margins, some of the paragraphs, it will all look a little bit out of whack. So it's really important to check that. If you're creating it and sending it to someone else, then you either need to PDF it so that the size is correct and it will adjust to fit, or you need to advise that it's been designed for US A3, B5, A4, whatever it might be. So that's just a little tip to remember. Now, the other thing I want to teach you about the parts of a page are the header and footer. Now, they are, as we discussed, the top and bottom white space and really valuable real estate, and they are on every single page of your document. You'll see that there's no information up the top here if we go from our menu bar. We've been working in the layout tab for the other sections in this video. However, the header and footer menu doesn't open up until you open the header and footer. And to do that, you simply double click in the white space at the top or the bottom of your page. So if I double click with my mouse here, you can see this is the header in this window and this is the footer here. And it's now created a new menu bar, or menu option, which is my header and footer. And from here I can format it and I can insert content. I can put my page numbers, dates and times, pictures. I can set up some rules about it, and I can set how far the header sits from the top of the page and the footer from the bottom. So if I make this 2.54, you can see that's now jumped down. And so my header is now, but that's 2.54, so it's squished down the main body. The header sits above your main window text. So if I was to make this 5 centimeters, you can see all it's doing is pushing and creating more and more white space that I can use for my header and footer, for the header and footer text. So typically you would make your header and footer, you would probably leave these as normal, but you would type in here and you might insert a logo or an image file that you might use across the page. Now, The other thing about the header and footer is that you create it once and it will repeat across pages as the default. So if I type in here, this is a header, and I was to insert a picture from file, let's just do one of these images that I have, which is a nice simple one. Let's choose this, and I pop this in, and I'm going to play with it a little bit, so don't worry about this. I'm just going to pop it and make it so that it sits nice and neatly here. So that might be your logo, it might be an image that you use in all of your graphics, whatever it might be. So on my first page, if I hit the header and footer and close it, you can see this says this is a header and activity. If I now go to page 2, here it is as well. And here it is on page 3. So it will repeat. And there are a couple of rules that you need to know. So if you want a different first page, you can tick to do that. It takes this away, but it's all still here. Okay, and I can put something different in here. If I want to create headers and footers that are different throughout the document, we need to work with breaks and create section breaks and fiddle with them that way, which I will have available for you in another video. But your header and footer is valuable real estate for things like page numbers and form, your file name, your client names, your business name, your tagline, contact information, but also images, so logos or bio shots if you're doing, say, a professional profile or a CV. It's also a really useful way to include some shapes and colors so that you can add some depth and color behind the text without it impacting the space inside the main window of your text. So have a play. Headers and footers are sometimes a little bit tricky, so practice with them and you'll get more comfortable with what you can and can't do.
So there you have it. The parts of a page that you should be making much more use of. Are you using all of them already? Did you know you could tinker with them as much as you can? And what are you going to do differently in future? I would love to know. Pop a comment on this video or get in touch directly and let me know. Cheers.